Good day and welcome to Mission Control Houston, where the International Space Station Flight Control Team is watching over the systems aboard the orbiting outpost as it tracks across the Atlantic Ocean from northwest to southeast at an altitude of about 250 statute miles. On board the Expedition 36 crew, Commander Pavel Vinogradov and flight engineers Alexander Mazurkin, Chris Cassidy, Fyodor Yashikin, Luca Parmitano, and Karen Nyberg are all busy with another day of on-orbit operations. Following yesterday's shortened 1 hour 32-minute spacewalk, the team in the U.S. side of the space station, in particular spacewalkers Chris Cassidy of NASA and Luca Parmitano of the European Space Agency, have been conducting exhaustive troubleshooting activities, taking a look at the spacesuit that was worn by Luca Parmitano on that 1 hour and 32-minute spacewalk. Shortly after he completed his first task of the spacewalk, which is scheduled to be 6.5 hours long, he reported some water inside his helmet. Didn't think it was immediately going to be an issue, but after his fellow spacewalker Chris Cassidy was able to get a look inside his faceplate, he saw that there was more water than they believed there was, and worked with the flight control team, flight director Dave Korth, and Karina Eversley, the lead spacewalk officer, and made a quick determination that it was a potential hazard and that they needed to terminate the spacewalk, end it early, and bring the crew back inside to make sure that they were safe. All that went very well. The team here has trained for contingency re-entry into the Quest airlock module, which we're looking at here in some video from yesterday's spacewalk. And they were able to successfully get Parmitano and Cassidy quickly back into the airlock and then back into the International Space Station, where they were able to get Parmitano and Cassidy out of their suits and make sure that everybody was okay. Today, the work has been focusing on trying to troubleshoot what might have gone wrong. There still is no smoking gun or definite cause of what happened or why that water ended up inside Parmitano's spacesuit. There are a couple of different potential sources for that water. They each have about a 32-ounce drink bag that they are able to keep hydrated with. There also is water that courses through a set of tubing in their essentially long underwear that's used to cool them when they are outside the space station. And that water flows through different sets of plumbing, both inside the suit around the astronauts and in the backpack. The team here on the ground today has been doing a variety of different troubleshooting activities. Some of these we're seeing from recorded video downlinked here in the equipment lock portion of the Quest airlock module. Activating the equipment lock, beginning to recharge the suit with water, inspecting every nook and cranny for any signs of water leakage. So far there hasn't been any immediate noticeable leakage other than some droplets in the neighborhood of one of the inlet loops from the canisters you use to scrub excess carbon dioxide from the spacesuits. But the spacewalk specialists here in Mission Control have seen a higher than usual usage of water from the feed tank that runs throughout the system and the suit's plumbing, and that could have been consistent with the readings that were seen yesterday when Parmitano's helmet began to fill up with water. Again, no real theory yet on exactly where this water came from or why, but they're doing a very deliberate step-by-step process of troubleshooting to try and identify what's going on. The spacesuits are in a way a combination of parts, and there's an additional spacesuit on board the space station should there be any contingency outside that would be necessary to have a spacewalk, something that would be very important to the space station. They could resize spacesuits and have these guys ready to go out, assuming that they're able to identify that this is not any kind of an issue that will affect all spacesuits, and that they're able to isolate it to this particular suit that Parmitano was wearing. Chris Cassidy didn't have any problems with his suit yesterday, so there's no evidence that there is a generic problem with the spacesuits. And so the team now is focusing on trying to figure out exactly what happened yesterday so that they can identify and design a repair procedure or shift over to alternate spacesuits. And no plan as of yet as to when they might try to do any of those tasks that were unable to be accomplished on yesterday's spacewalk. None of those tasks was particularly time critical, and so the team here is going to take a very deliberate and careful look at everything. Of course, research continuing aboard the International Space Station today. Russians working with a variety of different experiments. Karen Nyberg also doing some proficiency training for her role as the crew medical officer on board. She's also scheduled to be replacing a recycling system tank in the Environmental Control Life Support System and working with the Advanced Biological Research System. The spacewalkers also are stowing the tools that they had pulled out for yesterday's EVA so that they are out of the way and not any impediment to the troubleshooting activities. A lot of research has been going on throughout the week of this Expedition 36 activity. In addition to that, they've been performing a large number, almost a full work week's worth of research going on. Last week, about 17 hours worth of crew time was scheduled for research, even though we had the spacewalk and all those preparations going on. And also the crew on the Russian portion of the station has been busy packing up trash and no longer needed items inside the Progress 50 spacecraft, which is scheduled to undock from the International Space Station on July 25. The coverage of that on NASA TV will begin at 3:30 p.m. Central Time, and the undocking is scheduled for 3:43 p.m. Progress 50 is on the Pirs docking module for the space station, and when it departs, it will make room for the next cargo vehicle, Progress 52, which is scheduled to launch from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan on Saturday, July the 27th. Launch is scheduled for 3:45 p.m. Central Time, and it'll be going through an expedited 4-orbit, 6-hour travel to the International Space Station, and docking of the new Progress ship to that Pirs docking compartment is scheduled for 8:45 p.m. Central Time on July 27. Correction, we'll have our coverage start at 8:45 p.m. and then docking will be occurring at 9:26 p.m. Central Time. Again, all that will be covered on NASA television as the month of July continues. Today in Mission Control, the team is being led by Jed Freeling, the space flight director that's in charge of this Orbit 2 team. Robert Hanley is the spacecraft communicator talking with the crew, and immediately behind the two of them is Karina Eversley, who is a spacewalk officer from yesterday's spacewalk, who is working on a lot of the troubleshooting activities with the team. She's the one standing there and discussing with her background the continuation of these troubleshooting activities. Very busy day in Mission Control today, even though yesterday's EVA didn't go the way it was expected, in particular because of all this additional troubleshooting. The crew schedule for Luca Palmitano and Chris Cassidy has been pretty much scrubbed clean so that they can support that. As work goes on aboard the International Space Station with the crew, a lot of activities going on on the ground. In Denver, Colorado, we have the second annual International Space Station Research and Development Conference going on. It's July 16 through 18, and this is the prime conference for researchers to come together and discuss all the activities that are going on aboard the International Space Station, to discuss results from the experiments that are performed in that microgravity laboratory that is supported by 5 different space agencies in 15 different countries, and to also look for new experiments that could potentially benefit from the microgravity environment and the laboratory facilities that are aboard that. We're hoping to have an interview from Denver live over the phone with Pete Hasbrook, who is the International Space Station Associate Program Scientist and in attendance there. We'll find out more from Pete a little bit later today, exactly what's going on and what folks are sharing at the second annual International Space Station Research and Development Conference. This is Mission Control Houston. We are back with some live downlink television from inside the Quest airlock module as Chris Cassidy, spacewalker from yesterday's shortened 1 hour 32 minute spacewalk, continues troubleshooting activities, working with the spacesuit worn by Luca Parmitano and the equipment in the backpack to try to troubleshoot what might have happened and caused the large amount of water to form in Luca Parmitano's helmet that required the spacewalk to be concluded early after just a couple of the initial tasks were completed. Everybody's back inside and safe and healthy, but now we're doing the step-by-step deliberate work to try to identify exactly what happened yesterday and caused the problem in Parmitano's suit so that we can design a repair or work over it with a different spacesuit so that they've got the capability to do any kind of contingency spacewalk that is unlikely but might become necessary. Always trying to be ready for the unexpected on board the International Space Station. In the meantime, we have a special guest with us today, live by telephone from Denver in the second annual International Space Station Research and Development Conference. Pete Hasbrook, the Associate Program Scientist for the International Space Station. Welcome, Pete.
Good morning. Thank you. Good to talk with you again.
Nice to talk to you with you. How are things in Denver? What's the weather like? Pretty rainy here in Houston.
You would rather be in Denver. It's gorgeous.
Great. Well, hey, tell us a little bit about the Space Station Research and Development Conference, what the purpose is, and what you're doing there.
As you said, this is the second Research and Development Conference that we are putting on with the help of the American Astronautical Society. And starting with the ISS itself, ISS is a national laboratory for the U.S., which means it's a laboratory funded by the government that needs to be open for all users, not just NASA. And so we, the ISS program, we, NASA, want to make the most use that we can of this in-space asset, this significant, important asset. And so we've gathered to put on this conference to invite researchers from around the country and in a couple of cases from out of the country to come hear about what the ISS does to help them get an introduction to how we would help them do research on ISS.
Okay, and I understand you've had some fairly high-level people from the space station program and NASA and other agencies there talking in some of the sessions. Can you tell us about that?
The conference just started yesterday and started off with a couple of good talks with a welcome by the mayor of Denver, which was a nice treat. Mike Suffredini, who is the NASA ISS program manager, leading all of us international partners, he gave a good talk called the next decade of ISS and beyond, meaning through 2020, which is our current approved lifetime, but we're working really hard to extend the life of the ISS and build the case that we should extend it. And we also had a good introductory speech from Dwayne Ratliff, who is the ISS National Lab CASIS president.
And CASIS stands for the Center for Advancement of Science in Space, I believe, right?
Yes.
And so that's pretty much the best way for researchers who think that they might have something they want to do on the space station to get into the mix, right?
We've got a lot of different ways, but through CASIS to get to the National Lab is the route for people who are not traditional, let's say, NASA research or space research. They may be commercial, they may be other government agencies besides NASA. So, yes, that's the purpose of CASIS, is to get out and get the word out and get people interested and into the process and the system, and then help them as much as we can.
Okay, and I understand that a little bit later in the conference there are going to be some looks at the upcoming new research. Can you tell us anything about any of that we're expecting to hear about?
The conference session is broken into a couple of things. One of the other good sessions from yesterday was to talk about our top discoveries in microgravity. For instance, the things that we've already learned from our research, and that varied from bone loss due to spaceflight, which is applicable to osteoporosis, flames in space, the study of the propagation of flames and how that may give us insight on how flames on Earth would work. And the effects of, this one's a good one, mammalian immune system T-cell activation, which is immunity studies based on research we've done on ISS. We've got some presentations and some sessions coming up related to Earth science, looking at the Earth, materials processing, how we use ISS for education to promote education and promote STEM in students around the world. We've got a session tomorrow with our international counterparts who are really related to my role about putting the international in the ISS.
And that really is quite a challenge and an opportunity, isn't it, Pete? Because you've got scientists from many, many different countries and disciplines trying to take advantage of this unique set of laboratories that we have aboard the space station and in orbit, where there's one variable that is missing that is in every experiment on the ground, and that's gravity, right?
That's right. Using the ISS and being able to take out gravity from the equation, as you said, gives us insight into what's really happening. You know, on the ground, when we do research in our effectively two dimensions, if you're looking at something under a slide microscope and you're trying to build crystals or you're trying to grow molecules or cells, gravity tends to flatten them out, and you don't get a good full picture of what might be really going on. If you can go to space and do the same kind of growth, look at it under a microscope in space if we have it, or return the samples for analysis later, it tells you maybe what's really going on in the molecular structure of a protein, which may help you understand the disease. So taking gravity out of the way is it's enlightening, I'll tell you that. And sometimes by doing things in space, you have pure discoveries that you had no idea what was going to happen. And that's kind of why we use a laboratory sometimes. You let the scientists play around.
All right. Well, Pete, I want to thank you very much for joining us today on the phone from the second annual International Space Station Research and Development Conference, and also thank you to your host, the American Astronautical Society there. And we look forward to hearing more about what you've learned after you get back from the conference. And I don't know if you know, but we're hoping to have Dwayne Ratliff, you mentioned him earlier, on for an interview later on this week on the Space Station Live, or maybe one of the new scientists that is being recruited by CASIS to do research on the International Space Station. So we're looking forward to hearing more from the Research and Development Conference later this week, as well as thanking you for being here today.
That's great. Kelly, do you have a moment? I can give you a couple of websites that our listeners
Sure,
and viewers
go ahead and give us the websites.
Okay, the first one is for this conference, and it's sponsored, as we said, by the American Astronautical Society. So the website is www.astronautical.org, and then there's a slash and ISSRDC. That stands for International Space Station Research and Development Conference. So one more time in a string, it's www.astronautical.org/ISSRDC. And for those who would like to learn about research on space station just in general, I'll give you our website, which is www.nasa.gov/ISS-science. That's /ISS-science. And we write stories about all the research that's going on ISS, and this week we are focusing on this ISS R&D conference.
And I believe there's a new feature that's been posted there, and just a reminder that if all those letters are a little bit hard to follow, you can always go to www.nasa.gov/station, and that'll help direct you there. Pete,
Great.
Thanks again for being with us today.
Thanks, Kelly.
All right, enjoy your conference.
Thanks. Bye.
Again, that was Pete Hasbrook, the Associate Program Scientist for the International Space Station at the Denver Conference, an annual look at all the research and opportunities aboard the International Space Station to expand that research into new areas of investigation that will help us improve our ability to explore farther out into the solar system, and also bring that research back here to Earth where it can help everyday folks in their everyday lives.
Okay, I've got one stage down there. It's number 0320, and the old one was 0338.
Okay, copy that, and you can trash the old one in JSB 4030.
Okay, copy all. And probably when you come back, AOS, I'll give you a call to repower.
Copy that, and just to make sure we're all on the same page, the one you're going to replace is PMM 1, port forward 3, and that's GLA number 3.
You betcha. Yep.
This is Mission Control Houston, a interesting anniversary in space exploration today. The International Space Station is a partnership of 5 different space agencies, 15 different nations. Among 2 of the major agencies associated with this are the NASA for the United States and the Roscosmos, or the Russian Federal Space Agency for Russia. Back in the days before the end of the Soviet Union, one of the things that distinguished space exploration was the ability to use it as a bridge, even in times of trouble. The Apollo-Soyuz space test project was the first joint activity conducted by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration and the Soviet Union's space activities. 38 years to go today. We had the this week we had the first docking of a Russian and an American spacecraft in orbit. The two spacecraft launched on July 15, 1975. And then on July 17th, docked in orbit. It was designed to test the compatibility of rendezvous and docking systems and the possibility of an international space rescue. It was a 9-day Apollo-Soyuz mission that brought together two former spaceflight rivals, of course, the United States and the Soviet Union. NASA astronauts Donald K. Deke Slayton and cosmonauts Alexei Leonov got together inside the Soyuz orbital module, which was used to help connect the two. The full crew complement for NASA included Deke Slayton, Tom Stafford, and Vance Brand, and for the Russians it was Leonov and cosmonaut Kusanov. Valery Kubasov was part of that crew, along with Alexei Leonov, and the 5 people joined up in space on this date in history, some 38 years ago. That led to future cooperation between what became Russia and the United States in the Phase 1 program, in which space shuttles paid visits and exchanged crews with the Russian Mir space station, and then later on to cooperation with the multiple nations aboard today's International Space Station. We have a video package that takes a look, it's called Space Chronicles, at the history and development of space stations themselves and at how cooperation has evolved over the years. Let's take a look at that now.
As early as the 19th century, writers and artists and scientists around the world began to publish their visions of a crewed outpost in space. In 1869, author Edward Everett Hale penned The Brick Moon, a short story about a satellite built from 12 million bricks. At the turn of the 20th century, Russian scientist Konstantin Tsiolkovsky proposed ideas about human spaceflight, including an orbiting space station. In 1923, Romanian math teacher Herman Oberth published a treatise that included an orbiting refueling station for a manned trip to Mars. A few years later, in 1929, Austrian engineer Hermann Nordung wrote of a giant wheel-shaped platform that rotated to produce artificial gravity. One of Oberth's students was famed rocketeer Wernher von Braun, who in late 1945 developed a concept for a modular, wheel-like space station that would serve as a launching point for a mission to the moon. In 1952, von Braun published a widely read series of articles about space travel in Collier's magazine. In the early 1960s, as human spaceflight programs in the United States and Russia took shape, engineers and designers began to investigate a variety of space station concepts based on then-current technology. The Soviets were the first to establish an orbiting space station, Salyut 1, launched in 1971. In 1973, Skylab was assembled from unused Apollo rocket parts and launched to become America's first orbiting space station. 3 crews flew aboard Skylab for a total of 171 days on orbit, conducting a variety of scientific experiments and observations that demonstrated the value and the potential for space-based research. A temporary space station was created when an American Apollo Command Module spacecraft docked with a Russian Soyuz ship on July 17, 1975. Apollo-Soyuz was a viable example of international cooperation, the keystone in the foundation of the global partnership that would result in the construction of the International Space Station. With the launch of the first space shuttle on April 12, 1981, America resumed flying men and women into space.
We can follow our dreams to distant stars, living and working in space for peaceful economic and scientific gain.
In his 1984 State of the Union address, President Ronald Reagan announced the construction of a permanently crewed space station. 11 nations signed a formal agreement with NASA to participate in the development and construction of Space Station Freedom. In February 1986, the Soviets began construction of their modular space station, Mir. By October 1990, congressional budget changes mandated a complete redesign of the Space Station Freedom project, with an emphasis on affordability. In 1993, NASA was directed to maximize the new station's scientific capabilities and leverage Russia's considerable experience in space station operations by inviting Russian participation in the American space station project. The result was a global partnership of 15 countries that learned to work through differences in culture, language, politics, design, manufacturing, management, and operational styles. During Phase 1 of the space station program, between February 1994 and June 1998, space shuttles made 11 visits to Mir, and 7 NASA astronauts lived aboard the Russian station. The experience gained from this series of flights was invaluable and set the stage for the design, development, and construction of the greatest engineering project in the history of mankind, a state-of-the-art research laboratory orbiting our planet.
Good day and welcome to Mission Control Houston. I'm Kelly Humphreys, and with me today is Mark Guilliams, who is the lead astronaut strength conditioning and rehabilitation trainer for astronauts aboard the International Space Station. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
We're here today to talk because we're having a special day today. Today is the International Space Station crew briefing, in particular for Mike Hopkins, one of the next NASA astronauts who's going to be flying up to the International Space Station. And Mike Hopkins has a special affinity for training and fitness, and he's been working a lot with Mark to get ready for his expedition aboard the International Space Station. That news conference is going to be at 1 o'clock today. There's also going to be a Google Hangout that's going to involve a number of fitness experts, and we're going to have this afternoon a session where you can train like an astronaut here at the Johnson Space Center. A lot of social media folks and media are going to be here to see exactly how that works, and Mark's been involved in preparing for all that and getting Mike ready for his space station expedition. Tell us a little bit about what you do, Mark.
Well, what we do is there's a group of us. There's 4 individual trainers, and we get assigned to a crew member about 2 years out from flight. So we'll start training with them about 2 years out from flight. We'll be with them through that whole training phase of pre-flight. We'll be with them in flight, which is 6 months. We'll do all the exercise prescriptions in flight as well, with some help from the exercise lab that actually helps us do some of the development of that. And then we're with them for about 6 to 8 weeks post-flight once they return home to recondition them back to a 1G environment. So we're with them about 2.5 to 3 years through their whole mission.
Wow, and I bet Mike has been a bit of an extra challenge because he's such a fitness nut, huh?
Actually, no, it makes it easier. It's the fact that you don't have to beat him over the head to get him to exercise. He actually loves doing it.
Okay, now, and he's former military, and he's in great shape, right?
Yes, he is. He's in very good shape.
So tell us what kind of exercise equipment we have aboard the International Space Station to help him maintain his good shape and his health for returning to wind gravity.
Okay, well, we have a cycle, and we have a treadmill, so we use that for primary aerobic fitness, and then we have a resistive exercise device that allows us to do a multitude of exercises you would do in a gym here. It allows us, we can do squats and deadlifts, which are the main exercises that we do. You can do bench press and shoulder press and all bent over rows. Pretty much anything you think about you can do in a gym, we can almost do on space station.
And that sounds easy, but it's not, because you don't have gravity to help with the weightlifting, right?
No, you don't. The resistive exercise device, for example, works off a vacuum system. And as you're exercising, it pulls a vacuum that creates the load. So we can get the loads to about 600 pounds. And when we tell people that, people look, oh, these guys are doing 600 pounds. Well, you think about it, you're removing their body weight out of the system as well. So we also have to calculate their body weight back into certain exercises to account for the loss of the 1G or the 1G environment.
Okay. And similarly, when they walk or run on the treadmill, your job there is to try and put force on their skeletal system to help generate that bone density regeneration that happens every day here on Earth. But they would float away from a treadmill if they didn't have some special harnesses.
So what they use is basically a harness that looks almost like similar to a backpack. It comes over the shoulders and attaches at the waist, and then we use a bungee system that comes up from the bottom that they clip into, and that's how we control their load that they're running at. So that's where we're going to get the impact loads, the proportion force, just the same thing you would just walking around and running down here.
Okay, and we showed a picture of the treadmill system that we were using, and help me with the acronym. It's Colbert, and it got that name because there was a contest for a module, but it's the Combined Operational Load-Bearing Treadmill.
Resistive
treadmill, right.
Yeah, so we call it just T2 for short.
Call it T2 for short, because it's a second treadmill. We had an earlier one called the Treadmill Vibration Isolation System. And that's since been replaced by a new system because we loaned it over to the Russians, right?
Yes, and this one actually gives us a little bit more capability. It allows us to run at faster speeds and also allows us to do a lot more programming of individual programs into the system. Okay. So it helps a lot.
So I know that astronauts on orbit try and get about 2.5 hours of exercise in every day. And that's primarily to keep from losing too much bone density and muscle density. How much exercise do they get as they're getting ready to go on orbit?
It varies, again, per crew member. I mean, Mike probably exercises every single day. So I usually meet him here. We're here about 6 o'clock in the mornings, and we're training until 7:30 or so, pretty much every morning, 5 days a week. What he does on the weekends, kind of on his own. He'll go out and run, or he'll do some things like that.
Okay, now not to get specific about any
Yeah.
particular exercise routine, but in general, do you follow the kind of things that other trainers do, where you alternate muscle groups and areas?
Well, we don't look at it from that perspective. What we look at it from our perspective is we're training what we call movement patterns. So we look at how astronauts are going to be doing certain things in flight, like training for an EVA. And we're going to try to mimic those patterns within the weight room. And then there's certain things that we will do regardless of what specific training we're trying to do. So we're going to squat, we're going to deadlift, but then we take things like they're doing in the EVA, in the pool, training for EVAs, and we'll try to mimic those movements to prepare them to do better and be more functional in flight.
Okay, I'm sure one area is the hands, because the gloves, you're working against pressure when you're doing a spacewalk, and I know there's a lot of work goes into beefing up your hands for that.
It's basically forearm fatigue. So we'll do a lot of things where we're just carrying. Actually, it's an exercise called a farmer's walk, and if you've ever seen like the world's strongest man, these guys walk around with 400 pounds in their hand just carrying it, and it's a grip strength, forearm building. That would be an exercise that we would do. Not with 400 pounds, but those are the types of things that we do, yes.
Okay, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about you. Where are you from? Where'd you go to school? How'd you get into this line of work?
Well, I grew up in Houston. I've been here my whole life, so I've been around the space program my whole life. My uncle actually worked here starting back in the very beginning. I mean, he was one of the first engineers here. He retired a few years ago. So I've been around it my whole life, and it never really dawned on me to even work at the space program. I've been involved in athletics most of my life. When I went to school, I kind of fell into physiology, exercise physiology, and myself growing up, I always loved lifting and competing and doing that stuff, and it was just a natural fit for me. Back in the early 90s, when I started my graduate work, I did an internship here, and then I just kind of fell into it because we were just starting to do a lot of research with resistive training and how resistive training would affect space flight and that kind of stuff. So I just kind of fell into it, and I've been here ever since. I've been here about 20 years, and I've been the strength coach for about 16 years now.
Great. And I understand there's more to this than just exercise. We're working a lot with pairing exercise with nutrition to help minimize the kind of problems that you can have if you live in microgravity for a long time.
Yes, sir. And there's another group within NASA, the nutrition group, that works primarily with that. So we don't really deal with a lot of the nutrition stuff that goes on in flight. That's more in their kind of realm.
Right. But it is interesting that you pair the nutrition with the exercise workouts to help do that. And some of that, just as a sidelight, it's not necessarily intuitive. You might think that more protein would help you get muscle density, but it may be the other way around. And so we'll talk to a nutritionist about that later.
Yeah. But we are seeing some of that. We're seeing some increase of protein intake in flight, but then that runs into other problems. That there's other physiological problems that happen with too much protein from a zero-G environment. So you kind of, it's a very balanced system in how you got to deal with it. So.
Okay, and then just a little bit more about what you do when they get back on the ground. How do you get them back to normal activities after they've been in orbit and microgravity for so long?
Right now, it's pretty simple. They return. Once they land from a 6-month mission, they come home the next day. So we start our reconditioning the very next day. And we just start out with very simple things, from just walking and moving, just basic stuff that we take for granted. And it's not the sense that they can't do it, but because of the vestibular system and the effect of balance and coordination, and the muscles have to learn to fire in the quick sequence to do certain things again. You would think walking, I mean, you watch somebody walk and they're walking, but the muscles aren't firing in the quick sequence that they need to be, that you have in a normal. So it's just retraining the neurological system and the muscular system and the vestibular system to start handling those things again.
Okay. And I understand you even have to build up some things like calluses because they're not walking a lot up there.
No,
And
they actually lose all those things. Yeah.
And I hear that it's kind of like walking on those funny shoes that you use for shower shoes that have the little plastic.
Yeah, and you can actually have some feet pain when they come back just from just being in the 1G and how the bones and the ligaments within the foot act, because in space, 22 hours out of the day, they're basically curled up, and it's almost like sometimes if you ever gotten up in the morning after a good long sleep and the first step you take can be painful sometimes. It's kind of like that. So, it happens fairly rarely actually. So.
Okay. Well, Mark Guilliams, I want to thank you again for being here today and wish you well on all of our activities with Mike Hopkins and showing off how we train astronauts and how even young folks out there can train like an astronaut. We'll have some demonstrations on that later today for folks that are visiting us here in Houston. And good luck with getting Mike ready for his flight and keeping him healthy while he's there.
All right. Well, thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks again for being here.
Yes, sir.
All right. This is Mission Control Houston, back with live coverage of activities here in the control room as a team of flight controllers led by Flight Director Judd Freeling with Robert Hanley talking to the astronauts, continuing to support the activities of Chris Cassidy and Luca Parmitano as they do troubleshooting with the spacesuits on board. Of course, yesterday's 6.5-hour planned spacewalk was cut short to 1 hour and 32 minutes due to some excessive water that gathered in the helmet of Luca Parmitano's spacesuit. The team here was able to support those folks and bring them inside the Quest airlock module in an expeditious manner and get them in and out of the spacesuits. Everybody's fine and healthy, and you can see Luca Parmitano here in some recorded video looking into the spacesuit that he was wearing, trying to help troubleshoot where the water that ended up in his helmet was coming from. It wasn't coming from some of the normal places we'd expect it, the drink bag, the connection between the water system that goes to the liquid cooling garment, those types of places. And so there's a lot of in-depth troubleshooting and investigation going on today. The decks have pretty much been cleared for Cassidy and Parmitano to perform this work. Here he's shining a flashlight into the hard upper torso of the spacesuit. These spacesuits are essentially a bunch of parts that are put together. Different arm segments and leg segments are put together and then connected to this hard upper torso and the helmet, of course. We are coming up on a bunch of activities later on today. Our day with Mike Hopkins and his fellow crewmates Oleg Kotov and Sergei Riznatsky began at 9 a.m. with tours for a variety of different social media and media personnel. At 1 p.m. Central Time today, we're going to have the Interactive Expedition 3738 Crew News Conference, and that'll be followed by some in-person opportunities for interviews. And then at 4:30 p.m., Mike Hopkins will be going out to train like an astronaut, demonstrating that with local area youth. There's also going to be a Google Plus Hangout associated with a variety of different fitness experts around the country. So we look forward to that, and then tomorrow we're going to have an in-flight event in which we'll talk with the crew aboard the International Space Station. We're looking forward to that, and we'll be back with our regular coverage of the International Space Station at 10 a.m. Central Time Thursday. This is Mission Control Houston.